Hello and welcome to Dental Lab Insights. I'm delighted to have Bennett Napier with me today, who's going to be telling us a little bit about the state of the laboratory industry. Bennett is the Executive Director of the National Association of Dental Laboratories. Bennett, brilliant to have you here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Thank you.
So Bennett, I know you talk a lot about digital disruption and how that impacts the dental laboratory industry, so I was keen just to get your view really on how you see that at the moment.
Yeah, for the dental laboratory community, I think it's a great time to be in the market. It's certainly a lot of change, and the pace of change is extremely fast. But I think technicians by nature, have always been, really good in terms of adopting and transitioning and integrating new tools. In this case, digital technology as a tool. Many facets to that in terms of product categories, but. I think dental technicians by nature, help lead the way for dentistry, and their customer base, if you will, the dentist is generally a little bit later in terms of wanting to move that direction. But I think technicians, because of that philosophy that they've always had of I want to try the next thing and tinker with it and make it work. They do that, and they do it very effectively, and I think that's been very helpful for dentistry overall. Yeah. In terms of their transfer of knowledge and training, dental assistants, hygienists certainly, and clinicians themselves on the digital tools that can be there for the full dental market. And so I think that because of that approach that they have had in terms of being early adopters, if you will, in the supply chain, I think that gives them an even more valuable role in today's dentistry in terms of delivery of care, and I think that's very exciting for a lot of people. So
yeah, it's very interesting, the early adoption thing. Yeah, I mean, they've been early adopters of a lot of these technologies. Do you think that robotics is going to be one that is going to be adopted as soon as well?
Yeah, it remains to be seen where that's going to fall into the laboratory setting itself. I think it'd be naive to say that we won't have some aspect of it in our realm, just like everybody else. Yeah. I think certainly from a transfer standpoint, you can see it really hitting more closely on the clinical side. Yeah. But because of that, again, if we look at technicians are relied upon to be that kind of, now in many cases, the consultant, if you will, yeah. And the coach in some respects with their customer base, I think technicians will have to learn how that fits into dentistry, as well, whether it's in the lab setting itself directly or not. Indirectly, they're going to work with that in terms of robotics, whether it might be certain procedures, especially when you might have a specialist involved. I can see where that would really enter the picture, going forward, and technicians will have to, but we've seen that before. We've seen technicians in laboratories integrate business models with cone beam scanning and things of that nature. So it's no different. It's just a different tool. Yeah. It's obviously unique in the sense of what it can bring to the table. Maybe certain functions will truly be automated from an AI standpoint, but I think it's along with technicians look at it from a standpoint, it's just the next tool. Yeah. And we've used the new ones along the way and then hopefully made things better. This will be just no different, and the mindset should approach the same way.
Yeah. So you don't see the sort of the workforce of the future being entirely robots. It will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly there are aspects of things. Obviously, when you program AI, you can put in certain parameters to make certain functions move very well. Depending on what size lab it is, clearly, if you're looking at certain size laboratories, that clearly could be the shipping and receiving. Could a robot do that? Clearly, yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah. But if you're looking at certain things in terms of quality control, certainly I think if you look at the human element, there's always going to be a patient. The patient themselves is not going to be a robot probably. Mm-hmm. And so you've got a clinician, a technician, and a patient, all a human relationship there, and can't replace that with robotics. But I think certain functions, from a process standpoint, you could see that. But I think that technician, that human element will still be there.
Yeah, that's a relief to hear. Just moving on to something slightly different, the registration of labs with state agencies. What's your kind of position on that? How do you view that?
Sure. From an organizational standpoint, the National Association of Dental Laboratories has had a long-standing, kind of position, if you will, that for a variety of reasons that a dental laboratory should be registered in a particular state to do business with dentists in that state. And part of it, I think, has some very broad-based rationale behind that. Part of it relates back to the educational process in terms of formal education. For most of our history, we've been unregulated, if you will. Yeah. And that's pluses and minuses with that. But I think some of the things that have impacted us, maybe not in a positive way, is driving people into the occupation. It's an unknown quantity, if you will, in many places where patients certainly don't know that a dental laboratory exists, and certainly somebody looking to go into a very vibrant healthcare field, which we are. We're very heavily into digital. We're in dentistry, and there's still a patient aspect to it. To drive people into the profession, I think that would be important, and a lot of reasons why other healthcare occupations have grown and maybe gotten a more what I call brand notoriety, if you will. They're regulated, and we have not been traditionally regulated. So we think there's an educational component to that, and importance behind that. But also it's a recognition that today's technician, today's dental laboratory, if you will, is such a crucial partner for the clinical practice, that you have to have a very strong, educated and competent technician and technician team behind that practice for them to be successful, and to bring some minimum standards into play is extremely important. And so I think part of it's related to the pride element and just the recognition piece, but also ensuring the long-term baseline competency of people in the field, that they that the dentist can have some I would say assurance, if you will. The technician or the lab they're working with has some minimum competency, and certainly for the patient they would want that as well.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned earlier that lab technicians are often the sort of early adopters of this type of technology, and I guess in a way, they're taking that to the dentist and seeing if the dentist can kind of adopt it themselves. How do you view the dentist of tomorrow, and what will they look like, do you think?
Sure. Certainly. It's just, if we look at demographics for the for the U.S. in general. We're all looking at the same type of workforce in terms of demographics, in terms of age and perspectives on how they conduct their work. What's the work-life balance? Not limited to female dentists, which make up over 50% of dental students graduating now are going to be female. So does that mean that the number of hours that they work chairside is going to be less based on their own work-life balance objectives? That's going to be one thing that's already here. I think certainly just ethnicity is very interesting. It's predominantly old white male, if you will, both for the laboratory community and the dental community, but that's definitely changing. So just in terms of ethnicity, I think that's important. Just looking at how a laboratory approaches the study club process and their marketing messages. All of that's going to be different in terms of the dentist that they want to work with. I think the good news is, because of the changing demographics on the clinical side, you've got some unique opportunities for people to find new niches. There's such a variety of customers that you could work with, not only from a business model standpoint, but certainly, like I said, ethnicity and gender, those types of things, have definitely been evolving on the clinical side, and we see that in the laboratory community too. So I think that's very interesting, and certainly just in terms of again, the aspect of, for technicians and laboratories, graduates coming out of dental school, now really don't have that much training in dental laboratory technology. Right. So they're clearly relying on their laboratory partner to help with that aspect. And so I think because of that, it's got a built-in mechanism with digital technology. Labs are obviously working with that in many levels as early adopters, and they can see what's working and what's not working in the field, but across their customer base, really bring in best practices to help, younger dentists, if you will, not have to go as much through trial and error and say, hey, we've got 20 clients or 50 clients or 100 clients, thousands of clients in some cases, that we see this technology being used and how it's being used, new materials, and they really can be a very great partner for their clinician and help them not make mistakes, as maybe they're going to make mistakes, learn along the way, but not have to make as many. And I think that's great for dental care in terms of quality of care, and certainly to help that clinician be more successful more quickly as they become a new practitioner.
Great. So could you perhaps just give us an idea of the growth of the industry, what's kind of happening in terms of the stats out there?
Sure, absolutely. I think if we look at dentistry in general, it's slow but steady, which is growing. That's the good news, and that's that upside for labs is obviously we ride the tide with whatever's happening on the dental side, the clinical side. We're going to see that on the laboratory side. And so I think even with automation, and we've talked a lot about digital technology today, the number of technicians is actually increasing in the U.S. Average wages for technicians is actually creeping up. So even though you might see some consolidation on the lab side itself, maybe less physical laboratories, if you will, in terms of acquisitions, things of that nature, people retiring out from the profession, the actual workforce base is growing. And so even though we've got automation in the mix, all that does is allow labs to be more efficient and maybe increase their production capacity, but it's not relinquishing the need for technicians to actually run and use those tools. So I think that's very exciting, best of both worlds.
Yeah. Bennett, that's been brilliant. You've been a fantastic overview of the industry and an insight into what's going on. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Thank you very much.
And join us next time for another episode of Dental Lab Insights.